Our Place is a very unique initiative that started with one site and has expanded to 10 sites. At the core of it is recognition of the importance of schools as public spaces and places for children and families. And joined up with that are early years programs and then other health and social services, adult education join into that. But at the heart of it is the public school system and the early years program coming together to be a public space for young children and families that I think is a unique approach, as opposed to seeing them as unique programs, separate programs, differentiated from each other, operating with their own scope of practice, their own organizational structures that have to find ways to communicate with each other from time to time, but they really are separated from each other. Our Place is trying to, in my mind, erase those traditional barriers, those traditional separations, and bring them together into a much more cohesive community space for children and families. It is, I think, a unique structure, and particularly as it is scaling up in Canada. We've had a couple of smaller, less ambitious initiatives that have scaled up into different types of public policy, but I'm not aware of anything as comprehensive at a community level as Our Place. There are no breaks, there are no changes, there are no transitions. I'm learning this way now. Over here, I'm making a transition and I'll learn this way. Very often, I've been in early childhood education and I have collaborated and worked across the boundaries at different points of time with public education and primary schools. And very often we see them embedded in two different frameworks, and you think about how to cross over from one to the other or how to transition. And I think the notion of continuity of learning is transitions are no longer necessary because it's continuous. It doesn't have a change. You don't have to go from this approach to that approach. You don't go from play-based learning to structured school-based learning. It's much more seamless. The evidence shows us that when children are in early childhood programs and are experiencing, good learning opportunities with various approaches, and then they move into their primary grades, their early years in the school system, if it is very different, if the approaches are very different, they actually lose some of the learning benefits from their early years. And it doesn't matter so much what the approach is that they're moving from and to. It's that change, that difference in approach where they actually lose some of the benefits. And so I think it's important, if we want to maintain those benefits, that we think more about what we can do to make it a continuous approach, an aligned approach, an integrated approach, as about spending considerable time thinking about how we can transition children from one approach to another. But when we can build on, in a more seamless way, what and how children are learning, there's multiplier effects, there's benefits. We can enrich, deepen, and increase their learning. We have to start from recognizing that the culture of the professional learning that happens in early childhood education for early childhood teachers is based often in a different foundation than the professional learning and preparation that the primary teachers receive, and that they've grown up separately, have different cultures, and have really developed different vocabulary and different and expectations Early childhood educators, early childhood teachers there are different expectations for what children are going to accomplish, by and large, in the culture of early childhood education. When we dig underneath it and we look at what is important to early childhood educators for young children, around vocabulary, children's vocabulary, their abilities to express their abilities to express themselves, their interest in books, their ability to explore, to inquire, to use numbers. And then we talk with prep and year one teachers about what's important there around preparation for learning to read and emergent reading and early reading. We look at their expectations for moving beyond an understanding of number to actually manipulating numbers and doing computations and so forth and so on. We tend to emphasize the differences instead of looking at how really they are part of a continuum, and we could emphasize how they're aligned rather than what their differences are. And some of that comes from conversations and getting underneath the professional language we carry and really understanding what do we mean by that phrase? What do we mean by that expression? And we often find that we have more in common than is different. One of the pieces of advice I would have is to get at our understanding of children's early learning and well-being across the different programs and really try to dig down and find out how much is in common. That's a starting point. That's asking a lot of both professional groups to think about bringing their practices and their understandings that underlie those practices together. But I think that is important, and the leaders have to be there. The principal has to be there and value that and walk the talk, and find a way to have that same kind of common think with each other as they're expecting of their learnings. And then beyond that, the leadership outside of their settings, the regional leadership, the district leadership, the organizational, depending on what kind of programs there are, they need to come together and share this too. It can't all be downloaded to the frontline people. It needs to be, if you're serious about it and you want to maintain this wants to be a way of practice of moving forward. It's got to happen at each level. And I argue it has to be led by professionals that come out of those two different professional backgrounds.